Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating concept, the sheer, undeniable power of the collective. We're going to explore how unity and having a deeply shared sense of purpose can drive some monumental successes. And to do this, we're actually going to look at two worlds that might seem completely unrelated at first glance: national socioeconomic governance and professional football. Stick with me on this one, because the parallels we're going to uncover are absolutely mind-blowing. To really set the stage for this, I want you to hear the words of the legendary Scottish football manager Jock Stein. He famously said, "Cups are not won by individuals, but by men in a team who put their club before personal prestige." This brilliant quote perfectly captures the core message we're exploring today. You see, true success, whether you're battling it out on a muddy football pitch or debating policy in a grand parliament building, always requires putting the collective good ahead of individual ego. Let's dive right in and look at how this works on a macro level.
Section 1. The Polder Model Myth, Governing the Netherlands.
Now, when you think of the Netherlands, your mind probably jumps straight to classic windmills, right? But that imagery represents something so much deeper. The Netherlands is world famous for its polder model of governance. If you're not familiar, a polder is a low-lying tract of land that's been reclaimed from the water and is protected by dikes. For centuries, the Dutch have literally had to band together to battle the water just to keep their feet dry. This shared communal fight against a common enemy forged an incredibly egalitarian society. Over time, the literal act of building polders evolved into a powerful metaphorical framework for how the entire country is run. It's a system built entirely on consultation, harmony, and actively avoiding polarization. It is literally an origin story that shapes their governance today.
And that brings us to the concept of a political myth. Now, don't get hung up on the word myth. In this context, it doesn't mean a lie. It's actually a shared narrative that gives meaning and significance to a group's reality. Think of it as the story a society collectively tells about itself. Academics refer to this as governmentality. Because of their deep shared history of fighting the sea, the Dutch inherently believe they are consensus builders at their absolute core. And that belief fundamentally shapes how they approach leadership and decision-making. Section 2. Governing by consensus. The mechanics of neo-corporatism.
So how does this actually work in practice? Well, think of governmentality as the bridge. On one side, you have these deeply rooted political myths and collective memories we just talked about. On the other side, you have what's called neo-corporatism. This is the real-world, day-to-day system where the government actively cooperates with socioeconomic interest groups. We're talking employers' organizations, trade unions, things like that, all to maintain societal stability. So the collective myth of the polder directly drives the actual, functioning structure of the government. But, collaboration isn't always smooth sailing. If we look at the 4 stages of corporatist policy, it really comes down to a balancing act. You're constantly weighing how deeply involved these interest groups are, which we call institutional integration, against how much the general public actually supports the policies being made. When public support and integration are both high, you get this beautiful thing called responsive corporatism. Everything just works seamlessly. But if the public loses faith while the elites keep integrating, you end up with what's known as immobile corporatism. Basically, the reality is that consensus requires some serious compromise. While the polder model strives for perfect harmony, if the everyday public stops supporting the compromises being hammered out by leaders in closed meeting rooms, the entire system can just grind to a halt. It leads straight to decision deadlocks. It just goes to show that maintaining a truly collective effort takes constant work and, crucially, genuine buy-in from everyone, not just the folks at the top.
Which leads us to a really fascinating question. How does this collective memory, this inherent drive for consensus, actually translate to modern Dutch society outside of the stuffy political arena? How do everyday people engage with this collective ethos in their daily lives?
10 million. That is the magic number to keep in mind here. With over 10 million highly engaged fans, football is absolutely the largest social network in the Netherlands. We are talking about more than half the country following the sport. This isn't just a casual weekend hobby. It is a massive, living, breathing demonstration of the collective at work in modern society. Section 3. Football as social cohesion. The KNVB's impact.
The Royal Dutch Football Association, or the KNVB, completely recognizes that local football clubs are these incredibly powerful community hubs where societal differences just kind of fade away. And they use this sprawling network to tackle some very real-world problems. For instance, their program, The Invisible Injury, directly addresses youth mental health. World Coaches actually exports Dutch coaching methods all over the globe. They've got initiatives to empower female coaches, diversify club leadership through the class of 25, and even push for environmental sustainability with something called the Green Club Scan. They aren't just governing a sport, they are actively leveraging their network to drive societal improvement.
When you break down their impact across key areas like health, diversity, and sustainability, you see the KNVB is driving some truly measurable community action. I mean, giving out free energy advice and helping local clubs build modular wooden clubhouses, that's definitely not what you typically expect from a national football association, right? But it proves a larger point. When you have a massive, highly integrated collective, like 10 million passionate fans, you can mobilize them to create tangible, real-world solutions. It's essentially the modern, grassroots version of the Polder model in action. Section 4. Jock Stein's Collective Vision. Team over individual. Now, let's bring it back down to the human level. Jock Stein is undeniably one of the most revered managers in the history of football, and his personal philosophy perfectly mirrors this incredible power of the collective. He famously stated, "Football is nothing without fans." He fundamentally understood that a club's very existence, its whole identity, and ultimately its success are entirely dependent on its community. For Stein, it was never just about the 11 guys out on the pitch. It was always about the tens of thousands of people up in the stands.
And where exactly did Stein learn this profound lesson? Straight from the coal mines. Long before he was a giant in the football world, he was a miner. He once painted this incredible picture, saying, "You go down that pit shaft, a mile underground. The guy next to you, you don't know who he is, yet he is the best friend you will ever have." Down in the brutal darkness of the mines, shared struggle and utter mutual dependence forged a bond of absolute trust. Stein took that gritty, life-or-death understanding of collective survival and applied it directly to how he managed his football teams. Because of that background, Stein fiercely rejected the whole idea of relying on individual superstars or massive egos. There's this legendary story from right before the massive 1967 European Cup final. An Italian reporter came up and asked him who his star player was. Stein didn't even hesitate. He just replied, "Madam, I have 11 stars and their names are on the program." He absolutely refused to elevate any one player above the collective. He demanded his team put the club before their personal prestige, forging a single unit that was infinitely greater than the sum of its parts.
And the result of that unwavering team-first mentality, his squad, Celtic, became the 1967 European Cup champions. They were actually the first British team to ever win the tournament. And the craziest part? They did it with a team of local boys who were all born within a 30-mile radius of their home stadium. Stein noted they achieved this historic win with pure, beautiful, inventive football. It wasn't about one guy carrying the team. It was the ultimate, undeniable vindication of the collective ethos. When a group operates as one, trusting each other completely, they can achieve the seemingly impossible.
So we've seen how the centuries-old myth of the polder shapes an entire nation's government, how a massive football association uses its network for real social good, and how a coal miner turned manager built an absolutely legendary team on the rock-solid foundation of absolute unity. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Whether you are involved in governing a massive organization, leading a small team at work, or just participating in your local neighborhood, how will you build consensus? How will you harness the incredible, transformative power of the collective in your own community? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.